Hey guys, my name is Alex and I'm here at the Brandenburg Church of God on One Howard Drive in Brandenburg, Kentucky. Glad that you could join us for another edition of our podcast called Beyond Sunday Morning, where we talk about the Bible, theology, apologetics. We just get into some different topics and questions pertaining to the Bible and to Christian life in general. On this week's episode, we're springboarding off of what we kind of launched into last week. If you haven't watched last week's episode, I would encourage you to go and give that a watch first before you get into this week's episode. But on last week's episode, myself and Pastor Luke sat down for an introduction to the parables. We kind of just introduced the concept of the parables of Jesus that we read in the New Testament. We talked about what the parables are, what is a parable in general, why did Jesus use parables, and what the importance of the parables are. We just kind of did a little glaze over of the parables in general. But as we said in last week's episode, the plan was to kind of use that as a springboard to launch into some of the individual parables. And so we're going to be doing that for a few episodes, and then we may take a break and do something else and then come back to the parables later on. But we want to start diving into some of these individual parables of Jesus. And on this week's episode, myself and Pastor Luke sat down to talk about the parable of the lost coin. So we pray that this is a blessing to you, an encouragement to you, that you get something out of it, maybe hear something that you've never quite heard before. We hope that this is somehow fruitful and good for you, and we pray that it blesses you. So with all that said, let's get into this week's episode of Beyond Sunday Morning. Love you guys. God bless. Pardon me for sounding like Kermit the Frog or whatever today, because I'm still recovering from a cold, a sickness, whatever this has been. So please pardon me, and if I have to take a sip of water or cough for a second or whatever, please forgive me, but maybe we'll cut some of that out in editing if we can too. But either way, today we're going to talk a little bit about a parable that you kind of mentioned in the last episode and said you'd want to talk about this one. It's the parable of the lost coin.
Yeah, and keep your sickness over there.
Yeah.
Don't make me sick. Yeah, there's as we said in the introductory, Alex, there's over 30 parables in the New Testament, and hopefully we'll turn this series into into where we've addressed all 32, I believe it is, of those. But we'll start with the parable of the lost coin, and I'll take a minute and read it. I've got it up here on the. I've got the Logos app on my phone, and I got it pulled up here. It's in Luke chapter 15, verses, a very small parable, 8 through 10, and but the lost coin, and it starts out in verse 8 saying, either what woman having 10 pieces of silver, if she loses one piece, doeth not light a candle, and sweep the house, and seek diligently to find it? Question mark. Asking a question there. What person would not do this activity? Going to verse 9. And when she hath found it, she calleth her friends and her neighbors together, saying, Rejoice with me, for I have found the piece which I have lost. Likewise, I say unto you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner that repenteth. Short parable, just a few verses there, 8 through 10, but there's a lot, surprisingly, to unpack there. And hopefully we can get into the spiritual aspect of it, get into some cultural things here, but so on. But have you heard preaching or teaching on that before?
I think I've heard you preach on this before, actually. But, it's interesting with these parables. I mean, you can read a lot of them like this one. You can kind of read it on the surface level. And, you still get a powerful message out of it. You think of whether it's a coin or anything else, somebody's lost something. And we know there's other parables of lost things, like the lost sheep and so on and so forth. But, you think somebody's lost something, obviously it was valuable to them, and they find it, and, then it, compares to the angels rejoicing in heaven, when somebody gets saved. And so, you get a basic, powerful spiritual message out of that if you just think, surface level, she lost a coin, found it. But there's a whole lot more depth to that. As we were talking about in the episode last week, what the parables are. These take a lot of cultural things that were going on at the time, things that people at the time would have understood because they were living in that culture, they were living in that period of time. They were experiencing these things.
But Jesus would take these things that they knew commonly at the time in their culture and use them as examples. And so us today, we kind of have to do a little bit of digging. And that's from what I remember in the message. I think I heard you preach on this probably been a couple of years ago now, but that's kind of what you did and went a little bit deeper than the surface level on what this coin actually meant.
I had a professor in college who often used the phrase, without context, there is no text. What he meant by that, unless we understand all of the context, and we'll bring a little bit in here, the cultural, this historical, all the different contexts of what we're talking about, you're really not going to understand, or at least as richly as you would otherwise, the text you're reading. And first and foremost, the most important part of this, I'll start with the less important, but it adds a richer meaning to it. The most important part of this is the spiritual aspect of this. Mm-hmm. The last verse here, verse 10, it says, "Likewise, I say unto you, there is joy in the presence of the angels rejoicing of God over one sinner that repented of." This whole these 3 verses here. This short little parable is really pointing spiritually. The message is, the rejoicing in heaven that occurs once someone gives their life to the Lord. But let's go back to the first part, which I would say is of lesser importance, but provides a great deal of, I'll use the word again, context to, it makes a little richer meaning here. Now, there's 2 different, at least from my studies, there's kind of 2 different camps here that look at this lady and this coin, and that she lost. It actually says, having 10 pieces of silver loses 1. And there's 2 different camps that look at this. One says this was money. This was, her income, what led her to go buy things and do things. Now, and maybe that's true. The thing is, we don't know that it's true or that it's false. Right. And the one I'm going to tell you that my studies have led me to believe, I don't know if it's 100% true or false, because it just doesn't say. And we're going to be in those predicaments with the Bible that it doesn't say. But what I'll share in a moment makes a whole lot of sense. But if it was her money, she had 10 pieces of silver, and she lost a part of her income or her savings or whatever, and she wants to go find it. It still illustrates that one, or what I'll share in a moment, the spiritual importance of finding something that is lost.
Right. Either way, the spiritual message is still
unchanged.
The same. Yeah.
But going back to culturally, and one reason I tend to think that it is not a representation of physical money. Say you had 10 silver dollars in your pocket and you lost one. I don't think it is that as much as what I'll share in a moment. Is because when you look at money in the Bible, it's usually referred to as what the money was, and not a coin, not a this. It has a denomination. If we were to say today, "Hey, I lost a $50 bill," you wouldn't say, "Hey, I lost a bill," or "I lost something more generic." You would more closely define what you lost. Hey, man, I had 5 20s in my pocket and I lost a 20. You wouldn't say, "I had some paper money in my pocket and I lost one." You'd be more definitive on what exactly you lost. And some people that argue that this was money, well, it was a piece of silver. But usually that piece of silver had a denomination to note what it was, how much it was, either by weight or something. Does that make sense, maybe?
Yeah, and I mean, it adds more kind of weight to the story too if you're reading, the amount of money it was. Like I remember in Acts where was it where they burned all of their basically witchcraft books and things like that in the books of Acts, and it told the sum of money that it was worth. And if you translate that into today's numbers, it's like a crazy amount of money, and it just shows how much more the Lord meant to them at that point than all of that, what that was worth.
So a lot of time, and you say a good thing, a very good point to illustrate the reason I don't think it was actual coinage that you would spend down at your local Walmart of the day, and whatever. But it was the silver. It did have value. And again, that's kind of the spiritual thing. Every person, whether they're saved or unsaved, has value in the eyes of God. Yeah. So a lot of people will say she lost a coin out of her change purse or wherever she kept it or whatever it may have been, and she goes and finds it. And but we'll get to the finding in a moment. What I believe through my studies that it was, and again, whether I'm right or the person who thinks it was actual money was right, doesn't change the most important thing, which is a spiritual message. It was not uncommon. Well, let me say it differently. It was very common. We have a tradition of what I'm about to describe today. You have one on, I have one on. It's called a wedding ring. Mm-hmm. It was not uncommon for married women to have a piece of jewelry similar, not necessarily a ring, but similar to what our wedding ring does today to signify this person is married. Mm-hmm. What that would take the form of then, it could have been a necklace, or if you saw much, many, you know, I've actually saw this in my travels in the Middle East today. There is, I don't know the proper name for it, but there is, it's really a headdress. It's almost like not a crown of sorts. I don't know the right Arabic name for it, mm-hmm. but it's a headdress that'll kind of come around. You may have seen it. It'll hang. It's an adornment that women will wear. Mm-hmm. You may have saw some biblical movies, escaping me now, like Moses' 10 Commandments. Mm-hmm. If you look there when in Pharaoh's palace, there's some scenes of women wearing these things I'm talking about.
Right.
It was not uncommon for a married woman to have, it would have been maybe part of their dowry or something bought after marriage to signify that's a married lady. Mm-hmm. We do that in our culture today. If you look at Alex, I can't tell you're married or not, but when I see your left hand right. and that ring finger, I know he's married. So what my studies have showed me, this piece of silver was part of that adornment, whether it was something around the head or something around the neck. It was something that signified she was married. Now, you don't get this from the Bible. The Bible doesn't say what I'm about to say. And some people maybe online say, well, why are you talking about something that doesn't? We read a lot of, when we do our studies, we read a lot of extra biblical, books. We read Jewish history and things of the culture of that time, how they did things, and it adds deeper and richer meaning to things that's not quite as evident when we first read the Bible. And this is where what I'm sharing comes from. So a piece of jewelry that would have, signified a marriage, it wasn't uncommon from what I've read through Jewish history and other things in history of that time. If someone got a divorce, now if they got a dowry, and this was part of it, it's theirs to keep. Mm-hmm. So how do I tell if that person is divorced? One way to tell it's for the husband is to remove a piece of that. So if they would wear it, let's say it was a necklace, and I had 10 coins, silver coins on the necklace, and I divorce my wife and she's no longer there for whatever reason, I would maybe take one of those. So if she ever wore it, I could say, not only is she not married, she's divorced. Something happened here. Mm-hmm. And I tend to believe that the coins she lost, again, from my studies, and I'm not saying I'm right, I'm just saying this is where my studies have taken me. And again, just for the audience, it doesn't change the spiritual meaning, so we can debate this or not, but it doesn't change what's
But potentially
important.
Adds more depth to it. Yeah.
That she was concerned about her status as a wife, as a committed person to this union, which we know we are the bride of Christ. He's the groom. We're the bride of Christ as Christians. It adds, and you start really examining in detail how she was concern about her relationship and the perception people had of her as a married woman, it really opens this spiritual, context of us as Christians and how we should be concerned about our relationship with Christ and how people perceive our relationship with Christ. That makes a whole lot more sense on why she didn't wait till the next morning. She didn't wait till natural daylight to come in. She lights a candle and finds it to make sure, hey, this fell out. I've not, went back on this vow and these things. This is not what it seems. I'm fixing it, making it right.
Yeah, and that potentially adds just a whole nother level of spiritual depth to this, because, you think about salvation. Obviously, that's the overall message of this. But think about the urgency, if that's the case, if this is the type of coin that she lost, think about the urgency that she has to find that. We should have an urgency. We should have a deep urgency. If we are someone who say, like she was, if this were the case, she was married, and she had this, she just lost it, and she was worried about being perceived as being divorced, not married. She was worried about that perception. When we do something, when we mess up as Christians, we're saved, we're Christians, we're believers, but if we mess up, if we fall short, if we say something we shouldn't have said, if we represent ourselves in the wrong way, we should have that urgency
to make it right,
to find that coin, so to speak, and put it back so people know, we're right. And, it's not about us and us looking good, but it's about us being representatives of Christ. And people, when if they know that I'm a Christian, they know that you're a Christian, they know we go to church, or maybe even sing or preach or teach, or, just that you claim to be a Christian. We hold that title. We're ambassadors of Christ. And so we should have that urgency to make something right if we've done wrong.
Yeah. And, that makes a lot more, that the stance I'm taking makes a lot more sense than it just being a coin. And again, I just want to say it again. I know I've said it about 3 times, and I'll try not to say it a 5th time, but I just say this for the audience as somebody who may see it. If you disagree with me on what my research has said found about the culture, and you don't think it was a necklace or a piece or something that signified marriage, and you believe it was just monetary coins, that's okay. Let's agree that we disagree, but let's not disagree on the spiritual aspect of it, which is really salvation, sinner versus saved versus heaven versus hell. That's the real thing, and how heaven rejoices when one is saved. That's the only thing. I don't know why I never thought of it this way before, and I just kind of learned this about a month ago. I wouldn't say learn it, just really kind of resonated with me that the only thing I read in the Bible, some of you may know more than I, but the only thing that I read in the Bible to where heaven rejoices over, something that happens on earth that heaven rejoices over, and that's salvation. I don't read where they rejoice over anything else except people getting saved. Can you imagine what we do here, earthly, physically, me, you, whomever? We can control the actions of the angels.
Yeah, isn't there rejoicing though in Revelation over the judgment? Like they're rejoicing because God's judgment is finally coming upon those who.
That the wicked.
Sorry, I didn't mean to split. I know that doesn't mean anything.
That's fair, and we may have people that know that verse, but to me, that's getting toward the very end of things after Christ has happened and come. I mean, while we're living here, before those very end times happen. So no, you're right. That is what it says.
But you think about that beautiful picture always, because there's sometimes been cases where people get saved in services, which, by the way, salvation doesn't always have to happen in a church service. Mine didn't. It doesn't always have to happen in a church service. Matter of fact, I would say the the kind of the prescription that the Bible gives in Acts, and we see the early church, is that normally the conversions and things like that should be taking place outside of the four walls of the church. But, I know we've had those church services before where people get saved and people give their life to the Lord, and, just the people in the church will be clapping and excited, and you'll see happiness on the face of people, Christians who've been in this walk for however many years. They're excited to see somebody else there. But I just think of how much more, the party, for lack of a better way to put it, that they're having in heaven when that happens. You see people clapping and getting excited here, but that ain't nothing compared to what's going on in heaven.
Right. No, you're exactly right. And good segue into what I was going to say next about the rejoicing. After she finds it, I think it's important to see, she lights a candle and she starts searching. She doesn't take and you said this a minute ago, she doesn't take a nonchalant attitude, well, I'll find it in the morning, or I'll find it when natural sunlight comes in. No, I am doing whatever it takes for me to fix this and make this right and find this. So she puts forth some effort and she sacrifices a little something, and that's got a lot of spiritual connotations to it about our service to the Lord. But then after she finds it, and you said this pretty well just a second ago, after she finds it, she goes and tells someone. She tells her friends, she tells her neighbors, and they rejoice with her. You see that a lot. Very few times. I'm not saying this is a case for every time, but, and if you're listening and you didn't, and this wasn't you, I'm not saying you're not saved. I'm not saying nothing against anybody, but from times that I've witnessed a true salvation experience where somebody was honestly, goodness, saved, gave their life to the Lord, and a change happened, every time, almost every time, I should say, they're telling somebody. Mm-hmm. They want to share the good news of what happened to them. And what a picture this is. She goes and tells, and it's illustrating a spiritual point, of course. But, I remember my, excuse me, my dad was saved. My real father, biological father, was saved 30 days before he died. He was a Christian 30 days, saved in the hospital. And I had the privilege of praying with him and leading him to Christ. We did that. And right after that happened, the first person, he and my mother divorced when I wasn't even a year old. And they've had this, I really truly believe they had feelings with each other the day both of them died, but they were constantly like oil and water. And right after we prayed and he, confessed and the change happened, the first person he wanted me to call was her. And he wanted to tell her. And that was one sign that I knew this is real. This really happened. And but anyway, she calls her friends together. She tells them, they rejoice with her. When someone's saved, it's hard to keep that contained. You want the world to know.
Oh, you couldn't shut me up when I first got. Yeah. Maybe sometimes to my detriment too, because you can. I learned lessons, early on. You can get overzealous almost, and you're just wanting to tell everybody, and you learn really quick that. When you're excited, I've heard our Sunday school teacher, Jeff, he's kind of talked about this same thing before. I relate so much to what he says there because, he says you first get saved and you think everybody wants to hear, what you just because you're so excited about it. And then you realize, oh, not very many people want to hear it. And, you can be a little overzealous. And I definitely was. But
what a short 3 little verses, but there's so much into that. And, when we bring in a little bit of the culture and that context of the time, whether it was a coin, whether it was the headpiece, the marriage thing, it adds more meaning to it. But the most important thing is the spiritual part. And short 3 little verses. A lot of the parables we're going to go over are short. Yeah. And they will be, these may be shorter videos than what you're accustomed to. Yeah. And, Yeah, it's a good parable.
Yeah, and if it is that what you've said, if it is the coin from the headdress, it adds another depth to it, and kind of another spiritual message you can look at with that. And again, the main spiritual message obviously is the same, whether it's the money or that or whatever, and it's about salvation. But there's another message in that. You think about that headdress, and it was a sign that she was married. I've used a wedding band as a sermon illustration before. It's a really great sermon illustration for that symbol that you have that commitment. Does my wedding band make me married to my wife? Is that what makes me married to my wife and committed to my wife? No, but it's an outward expression. It's something to show everybody else, hey, look, I'm committed to one woman. I'm committed to my wife. As Christians, there should be, and there's going to be, the Bible says, if we are genuinely saved, if we have genuinely accepted Christ, there's going to be some sort of outward evidence. Now, it may not be immediate, and it may not be, everything all at once, and everybody's going to be at a different pace, everybody's going to be at a different level at different times, but you're going to, at some point, see fruit, see evidence of a genuine salvation.
Yeah, you will. And heaven will rejoice.
Yeah, amen. All right.
Heaven will rejoice.
Well, that I think that may be a little bit of a short episode, maybe the shortest episode we've ever done, but there we go. We covered a parable, and hopefully, as we said, as we go throughout the next few episodes, we're going to be looking at some more parables, and maybe we'll do a few parables, and then we'll go on to another subject and come back to the parables later, and hopefully eventually.
Yeah, we have over 30, so this could take a while.
Yeah, it could take a long time there, but yeah, hopefully this was a blessing to you today and encouragement to you. Hopefully we'll be able to see some more faces in here on the podcast as we go throughout these next few episodes looking at different parables. But for now, have a great rest of your day. Love you guys. God bless.
God bless.